All right. Hey, yo. Got some updates for you. Let's get right into it. So, this is going to be an update on Venezuela, some econ data from January 4th to 11th, so yesterday. So, Venezuela, we'll be talking about what came of the New York hearing, what came of the UN meeting, Senate hearing, US plans of Venezuela, and geopolitics. And for econ data, we'll talk about the ISM manufacturing and service PMI, talk about the JOLTS job openings, talk about the non-farm employment change, unemployment rates, the preliminary consumer sentiment, and inflation expectations. From there, I give you also give you some investment opportunities, and I talk about what's new with me. All right. So starting with Venezuela. So January 5th, Maduro appeared in court. He pleaded non-guilty to narcoterrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation, and possession of destructive devices. Right. So his defense team plans to challenge this based on the grounds of head of state of immunity and illegal abduction. So for a head of state immunity, they posit that a sovereign leader cannot be prosecuted in a United States court. It is important to know that the United States does not formally recognize Maduro following the 2024 election. This goes for both the Biden administration and the Trump administration. So we'll see how that goes. The second case is illegal abduction. Here they might have a stronger case. This is based on the lack of formal extradition process, right? So the idea here is that Congress has war powers and they weren't notified, and that the United States Charter was in violation, right? So that in either case, in the Senate and the United Nations Charter, they were not consulted before this attack. Though for the Congress war power, it is still up in the air whether or not this is considered a war or military operation. Considering that this is the operation was localized to Caracas and nowhere else for now. But for the UN Charter, I guess we did see that the sovereignty of a nation was violated. Though an argument could be made by the United States that this is in self-defense, right? Narco-terrorism. So as far as the UNSC, the Security Council, there was a majority votes for condemnation of the United States action. This failed because, well, the United States has a veto power, so that's null. And for the General Assembly, about 75 to 20 believe that the operation was illegal, right? Including some allies like the UK and France. So this is cool. The Security Council and the General Assembly both agree that this was an illegal operation that needs to be condemned. But what can the UN do? Well, they have limited powers. All I know they can do is sanction, and the United States vetoed. Anyways, so I guess all countries can decide to go on with the sanctions regardless of the ruling or the veto, but that's still limited in response. Kind of begs the question of what the United Nation is there for. I'm not really surprised considering what the Chinese and the Russians have been up to. What has the UN done? Yeah. So it's harsh to say, but the UN seems to be a useless body, at least for enforcing international law. So moving forward, the next court appearance is expected to be on March 17th. Though I expect this court case, or this case in general, to drag on, considering that classified intel and testimony from high-level informants still needs to be vetted and obtained. So that's something to watch out for moving forward. All right, so now we move on to the U.S. government or parliament. So on January 8th, we had a Senate hearing on the War Powers Resolution. So this is to bar any further military operations in Venezuela without consulting Congress. It is important to note that this is a motion to discharge or a motion to proceed this ruling to the floor to vote, which is expected to happen, I believe, sometime this week. Trump still seems to hold the cards right? In that he can still continue operations in the meantime while this is getting debated on the floor. This still needs to pass the House. If it fails in the House, that's the end of it. Trump can veto. It seems to be the likely outcome here, since you need a two-third majority, about 67 votes in the Senate to override the veto. The motion to discharge passed with 52 to 47 votes, so that's not even meeting the two-thirds majority. So it looks like that's going to fail. And looking at the War Powers Act, it seems that the president can still carry out operations for up to 60 days after the act has been passed. So Trump still has breathing room for this to happen. And there's also the issue of this operation being a war or law enforcement, right? So everything seems to be stacked on Trump's favor. So it looks like if Trump wants to carry out more operations, he has the green light to do so, based on what we just talked about. All right, so now what is the U.S. plan for Venezuela? Well, on I think last week Wednesday, Rubio discussed stability, recovery, and transition. So the U.S. is planning to sell the oil obtained, about 30 to 50 million barrels, including that was seized from the Russian shadow fleet. They plan to sell at market price. For this to happen, sanctions will have to be rolled back, to transport and sell the oil. And the U.S. intends to keep the proceeds from the oil sale until the Venezuelan people, I guess, is ready. Not sure how long that is and whatever that means. The U.S. still intends to build or rebuild the oil and gas infrastructure in Venezuela. Um, as far as I know, I guess the U.S. oil and gas execs, as well as energy companies in the Americas, has been approached and I guess talked or induced by the administration to do so. With all this brouhaha on oil, the build outs are still expected to take a while, especially trying to incentivize investors because right now oil prices are low and oil demand is low, right? Because of the Russian flooding of the markets. So there isn't a high demand for oil since oil is abundant. Um, Most companies are also reluctant to invest in the United States, even, right? Or even in other areas in South America. This might be due to policy or then again, like oil demand being low. So the administration would have to make a really good case and incentivize investors. There is still negotiation going on in Caracas right now. Maduro's government is still in office. Rodriguez is in power as of now. We don't know how long she'll be there since she is a temporary head, right? So the situation is still fluid. We still have to see how it goes in the future. Not to even mention the infrastructure costs to, I guess, replace and repair crumbling oil rigs, right? There's a lot of cost there. And some legal frameworks, right? So far, there hasn't been protections in case of disputes or compensations for these companies. There isn't a formal trade agreement or investment treaties in Venezuela, right? So that still needs to be in place. Not to mention the Chinese or Russian influence or interest still in Venezuela. So we have to navigate that. So this whole ordeal might roll out for years, but who knows? It's something to keep an eye for. But regardless, if this does go through, it's going to be a very good thing for, I guess, the U.S., especially for the energy sector. So you should look into that sector moving forward to 2026 and beyond. All right, so now we'll talk about the geopolitical angle of this, right? The idea here seems to be keeping the Western Hemisphere as a close sphere of influence, right? Meaning no foreign power can control or own strategically vital assets. So a play for national security, right? So I would impact Russia and China. For China, it looks like some of their Belt and Road initiatives has been lost, right? So Venezuela, as we know, they owe about 10 billion in loans, largely paid through oil. The question now is like the debt owed. Like, is there an international body that's going to enforce this payment? I mean, the UN seems to be useless, and I guess the IMF is majority owned by the United States, so it's likely that China probably wouldn't get that money, but we'll see. So they got shafted. Um, so Venezuela makes up about 4% of China's oil source, and that's about like 80% of Venezuela's exports, with the majority coming from 20% coming from Russia. So now that the United States is controlling the oil of Venezuela, Cuba is expected to be affected since majority of their oil comes from Venezuela, and Colombia, which is in talks of the with the United States, is expected to gain from this. So far, it doesn't seem to be looking good for China, especially in Venezuela and possibly in South America in general. As for Russia, now that the United States has one of the largest oil reserve at its disposal, as at least for now, it looks like their primary source of income seems to be likely to be getting squeezed. Right? We're not seeing that now in the short run, since the oil there is an oil oversupply, but in the future we might see that happen. This might also incentivize, some allies, Russian allies like India or India, or some European countries to also buy oil from the United States. So Russia seems to be getting squeezed. We also saw some power projection in that the United States seized a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker. So kudos on that. So it still begs the question: like, was this Venezuela operation at this point about drugs, oil, or geopolitics? As far as I can see, it seems to be about oil, but mostly about geopolitics, right? We talked about projection of power against Russia. I guess the Belt and Road initiatives for China, and I guess the reigning of power or dependence towards the United States, especially if the war in Ukraine ends. But I think it's about oil and geopolitics. You can let me know in the comments what you think. So now we talk about the boring parts, some econ data. So last month for the ISM manufacturing and service PMI, we saw that the manufacturing sector suffered in that the index dropped from 48.2 to 47.9, right? This is the worst since August 25th, since August of last year. Though it is important to note that even though this is worse, the index has been recovering since its lowest point in July 2023. So it is weak right now. It is still below 50, but we're seeing some recovery from its lower point in July at 23. For reasons cited, tariffs and interest rates, right? That's a huge thing. We might continue to see its effect into 2026. The service PMI seems to be doing better. It rose from 52.6 last month to 54.4, larger than expected. This is the best since the start of January, since last year. Though this might lower the incentive or the pressure for the Fed to cut, tariffs still seems to be an issue, especially in the accommodations and food service sector. So tariffs. Data for the JOLTS job openings. Looks like job openings dropped from 7.4 million to 7.15 million last month. We lost about 303,000 jobs being opened. The change between those months, right? This is not good, especially considering that about 100,000 jobs per month is expected for a healthy economy. As far as the non-farm employment change goes, We lost about 6,000 jobs. But if we had to look at the job openings to unemployment ratio, it looks like more jobs are being opened. So there was an increase from 0.95 in September to 1.1 in, I believe, November. Though you do have to take this data with a grain of salt, especially since we're missing the October data. So far between September to November, there was an increase. Another thing to note is that this has been rising since April, so that's a good thing. What this simply means is that there are more jobs being opened, a positive number above 1%, above 1. But this doesn't necessarily mean that companies are hiring. So there are more jobs, but people aren't getting hired, right? Kind of plays into the low hire, low fire situation we have going on. The unemployment rate dropped from 4.6 to 4.4%, which is better than expected. The consumer sentiment rose from 52.9 to 54. Looks like consumers are getting more confident, at least for last month. The inflation expectations stayed flat at 4.2. The short term, so this year in 2026, consumers expect the inflation to be high at 4.2%. And their long-term expectations for inflation increased from 3.2 to 3.4%. A majority of what they cited was tariffs, right? Tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. So based on everything we discussed from the data, we talk about my sectors that I'm watching, right? The investment opportunities. So healthcare seems to be a strong point, as been the theme in 2025. Um, Previously, Trump announced deals on price cuts for medications. We have strong employment data for healthcare and healthcare services. So this sector seems to be the best to look at right now. ETFs to look at would be XLV. Stocks to look at would be UNH for services, and Eli Lilly and LLY and NVO for obesity drugs. Of course, we have the momentum players, tech and AI infrastructure. Um, we're seeing a rotation from software, so like your Microsofts, your Google, to hardware and equipment makers, right? So sectors to watch would be XLK, SMH, Nvidia, AMAT, ASML for hardware. Another one to watch would be financials, especially now that we see that the yield curve is beginning to steepen and the economy seems to be resilient. The service sector is booming, meaning there is likely a business expansion going on. So you should look at XLF and JPM. And it is also important to start looking at small caps, right? We mentioned before in the tech and AI infrastructure play, money seems to be moving out of the Mag 7 into, I guess, areas where AI is actually being utilized. So IWM, the Russell 2000, might be a good sector to watch, or good ETF to watch this year. All right, so as far as what I'm looking forward to this week, we should expect earnings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays from major banking firms, from JP Morgan, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo. Depending on how these banks do, it spells how the financial sector will do. So watch that. We should, as discussed, we should begin the War Powers Resolution hearing. We should get more data on inflation, CPI, PPIs, and on retail sales. And this came out of left field for me. I completely forgot, but there's likely to be a Supreme Court tariff ruling this week as well. So very interesting times. As far as in 2026 in general, we should continue to watch Venezuela, or in South America in general, or the Americas in general. OpenAI is expected to announce their IPO mid to late 2026. The Crypto Clarity Act hearing should also happen in mid 2026. For the Fed cuts, we should expect a meeting in July 27th to 28th. But based on the data we just looked at, with the booming service sector and relatively stable and unemployment, the rate cut is slightly expected to slow this year, but I guess we'll see. There's going to be a new Fed chair in May 26th, and we should begin to see the effect of the One Big Beautiful Act also happen in 2026. So, yeah, interesting economic opportunities and events to watch in 2026. All right, now that we have Venezuela and Econ data out the way, now I just unleash or just talk about what's up with me. Well, just chilling. Life is pretty routine. That I have started a job as an EMT. I mean, the job is pretty straightforward. We have a whole protocol we follow. No stress. I have a good boss. He is a good person. I mean, not just to his employees, but to his clients or his patients. A respectable man kind of inspires me or inspires people to be better. Um, since I work as an EMT, I get the opportunities to ride along in ambulances. We go to different places, downtown Atlanta, Decatur, DeKalb, right? See a lot of great scenes there, a lot of graffitis around. Um, yeah, I mean, it's something I didn't really see myself doing, but now that I am doing it, I enjoy it pretty very much, right? I say it out now, but I guess we will still have to see how the psychological aspect of the job actually weighs on you, since you deal with a lot of sick patients, really sick patients at the end of your life. But so far, even the patients themselves have been very welcoming. You know, a lot of cool people I've met. There was a man that was also a firefighter. He gave me a couple of good tips. There was a lady, a very sweet old lady. Uh, this might be creepy, but kind of just giving me relationship advice, asking whether or not I've been married or that you probably should get a wife that knows how to cook. I kind of agree. But yeah, it's a good job, both with the type of people that you interact with, the scene, and my boss. In terms of other things, I'm still waiting for the fire services to reach back. Usually, from the research I've done, usually takes about 5 months for them to reach back. So if they haven't responded by February or March, it's likely they've moved on. So I'll likely have to apply again or try to find, I guess, another job or just stick with this one. But we just have to wait and see. Another one is, yeah, I made a new gaming channel, right? I'll link it down below. I mean, since life um is starting to get routine for me, the schedule is expected to change based on whether or not I'm needed at work. But I guess to stay on top of things, I will try to notify my viewers on, I guess, X and Instagram, which I have linked below, or when I begin to stream or when a video is up. But you should expect me to stream maybe from 5 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. every day. But yeah, with all things considered, I will notify you before I begin streaming. So that's pretty much all I have. Stay tuned for the news coming up this week. But yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. Till next time, work good, play good, rest good. Bye.